You've probably seen the headlines about Jackson Hole this week, and this one caught my attention. Reuters is talking about something called fiscal dominance, the concern that as governments take on more and more debt, eventually the central bank could come under pressure to help support that debt. Now that sounds like a conversation for economists, central bankers, and Wall Street, but I think there's a much more practical question for business owners. What happens to the cost of capital when governments need more and more of it? Because that's the part of this story that I don't think gets talked about enough. And the pressure increased even more during the pandemic. At the same time, longer-term treasury yields have been rising, which means the government has to pay more to borrow money. Reuters is now reporting that investors are increasingly questioning whether central banks may eventually be called upon to help absorb that debt. And here's where I think business owners need to pay attention, because money isn't free. Capital has a cost. When you need money for your business, you have to either generate it internally or go into the market. Or go into the market and get someone else to provide it. And you're competing with everyone else who needs capital. Consumers, businesses, real estate, and of course governments. So if the demand for capital keeps increasing and investors require higher returns to lend that money, the cost of borrowing doesn't just become a government problem, it can work its way through the entire economy, and that matters to you. Maybe you're considering buying a piece of equipment, maybe you want to expand your facility, maybe you're looking at acquiring another business, maybe you need working capital to take on a large new customer, maybe you've simply reached a point where the business needs a bigger financial cushion to support growth. The headline might say government borrowing costs are rising, but the business question is, what is my cost of capital going to look like when I need it? And that's where we get beyond the financing, because I think a lot of business owners approach financing backwards. They start with, how much can I qualify for? But I think the better question is, what do I want the capital to accomplish? Those sound similar. They're not. Let's say you can get $500,000. That's great, but what happens next? Does that money sit in an account? Does it get used to cover recurring expenses? Does it plug a temporary hole? Or is there a specific strategy behind it? Maybe that $500,000 allows you to purchase equipment that increases production. Maybe it gives you the working capital to take on a contract you otherwise couldn't handle. Maybe it allows you to buy inventory at a better price. Maybe it allows you to give the breathing room to restructure part of the business. Now, the financing is doing something. It's supporting an objective. And that's the distinction I think gets lost in these larger financial stories, because the cost of capital isn't just about the interest rate. It's about what you're doing with the capital once you have it. If you're paying interest on money that isn't producing anything for the business, that's an expense. But if you're using capital as part of a well-designed strategy that increases capacity, improves efficiency, creates revenue, or strengthens the business's position, then you've changed the conversation. Now you're asking what kind of return that capital can generate. And that's a much more useful question. So when I read this Reuters article and see people debating whether central banks may eventually be pressured to help support government debt, I'm not looking at it simply as a Federal Reserve story. I'm looking at it as a capital story. Because if the cost of capital changes, business strategy has to change with it. You may need to rethink how much cash you keep on hand. You may need to rethink when you expand. You may need to rethink whether you buy equipment or lease it. You may need to rethink your inventory strategy. You may need to secure a line of credit before you actually need one. And most importantly, you may need to understand exactly what that capital is supposed to accomplish before you go looking for it. That's what I think this headline misses. It's not just, will the Federal Reserve eventually help the government finance its debt? We're not just interested in whether you can get capital, we're interested in whether you have a strategy for putting that capital to work. At SRG Consulting, PLLC, financing is not the strategy. It's a tool within the strategy. Whether you're looking at business financing, equipment financing, a line of credit, or working capital, we start with the business objective and then look at how capital can support it. So here's the question I'd leave you with today. Don't just ask, how much capital can my business get? Ask, what would my business do with that capital? And what would make the cost of that capital worth it? Because the right financing isn't simply money you can borrow, it's capital with a purpose. And that's what we believe makes the difference between financing a business and actually helping it grow. If you'd like to talk through what you're trying to accomplish and whether financing could play a strategic role in getting you there, reach out to SRG Consulting PLLC. We'd be happy to start with the strategy and work backward from there.